Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm Christine Heusner. I'm the project manager for graduate programming at the RIT Graduate School. And today we're going to be discussing the curriculum vitae and the resume. We'll go through some of the differences of those, and then content, writing, and design and layout. I'm joined today by Nick Paulus. He's the manager for scholarly publishing at RIT Libraries. We were going to have Dr. Twyla Cummings with us today, and unfortunately she wasn't able to join us. But I do have her information, so I'll be sharing that with you as we go through our presentation. So we're going to start by just defining sort of what is a resume and a CV, what is the content for it, and then I want to just talk a little bit about cover letters and how they relate to these documents. A CV, or a curriculum vitae, okay, it's Latin, and it stands for the course of one's life. And I always like to use a little Latin because I took 2 years of it in college and I don't get to pull it out very often, so I think it's nice when we can just be like, what is the root of that? Makes me feel like those 2 semesters weren't wasted. So when we think of it, what does it mean, a course of one's life? It's an in-depth document, right? So this is going to go really in-depth and go through a story of your experience and, what you've done as a professional. A resume is more of a summary. It's going to be more specific and directly related to the position that you're applying for. So kind of look at them next to each other. How are they used, right? So we do use these for different purposes. It's very common, especially for graduate students, to have both of these documents prepared. Right? So I would definitely recommend that it's not about one or the other. It's really about preparing both of them to have those in your arsenal. Because you are academics, you're in graduate school, so you should have a CV. So CVs are most commonly used for academic purposes, but they're also very popular internationally for international positions. They're popular in research positions. So we do see them outside of just academia. There's no length limit for a CV. And that's a common question I get from graduate students is, well, how long should my CV be? Well, it should be as long as it takes, right? So these tend to vary in length and they tend to grow as your career grows, right? And then they should really go into a lot more detail about what you've done through your academic studies and in your professional studies, okay? The resume is more commonly used for corporate and industry positions, okay? It's going to generally be 1 to 2 pages in length. We don't follow that 1-page rule anymore. So keep that in mind. It's still nice to keep it succinct, okay? So generally, going into 2 pages, fine. We don't want to go too far, too long with it, because it should be much more targeted of a document. And it's going to be directly about work experience and the experience and skills that relate to the position that you're applying to. Okay, so what should you include in a CV? Long list, right? Because this varies. Some of these things on this list are applicable to all of you, and some of these things you'll be like, well, I don't have that. That's okay. And this is not an exhaustive list either. There's other things that may be relevant depending on your field of study and where your research is. So as an example, if you're an MFA student, you would include exhibitions on this list. If you are a design student, you might have projects or products. If you're an engineering student, you might include patents, right? So there's some things that are not even on this list that you might be including depending on where your expertise lie, okay? And then this list is not in order either. It's not in a bad order, honestly, but depending on where you have the most experience and what might be most relevant to the position you're going into, you may reorder these things. As an example, I've recently changed careers, actually. So I've worked on this document recently. And I went from being a professor to being in an academic, what do you call this? I don't know. Like a different position, not a non-teaching position. So where I used to have my lead with my teaching experience, now I lead with my project experience because I switched what sort of position I was sending this to, right? You may have more experience that is relevant in one of these particular areas, and that might be the best way to lead. So things to consider. What about a resume? Ooh, it's shorter. So for this, you're really going to be looking at your job position descriptions as you're building this. And it's not that we need a new resume for every position we apply to, but for every maybe category of position, if you're targeting a particular type of position, you might have a version of your resume for that. And likely you might be targeting a number of different types of positions. Maybe you're looking at a research position, and then maybe you're looking at a project manager position or something like that, right? So you may have a couple of different versions of your resume for that. But, you know, we want to target more towards work experience and skills in the resume. And it's not more of that exhaustive document that's really taking us more on a journey of our professional life. This is going to be generally more current of a document. You don't need to necessarily go as far back. And you don't need to go into skills that might not directly relate to that position. Okay, I want to just show you an example of each of these so we can just sort of see how that content plays out in reality. I think that's valuable. So let me start with a CV. And Dr. Cummings was so kind as to share her CV with us. And she's had a full career at this point and is actually retiring from RIT this summer. So she does keep her CV up to date. So, so you can see a little bit of a difference. Often with CVs, we do lead with education. And whereas with the resume, oftentimes we kind of tuck that later into the document. You can see that, this is a long document. So this is 17 pages that we're looking at. We won't look through all 17. But this is where it can be valuable, as this document grows specifically, to have sort of a summary. And you see she also puts an areas of substantive knowledge to sort of help us sort of get a picture of who she is, rather than reading 17 pages and then trying to think, who is this person, right? So this sort of helps us come into the document with sort of a targeted idea. So professional experience, you can see she's breaking down some key areas or qualifications, things she did in these positions. Oftentimes, as you go through your work career, you have multiple different titles as you grow through a company or organization. You can see she lists these, right? This is really taking us on this whole professional journey, right? So we're putting in all of the information into this document. You can see just simple things such as the spacing helps us sort of go through it pretty easily. But it is just sort of this long list of information. But we can see when we're going sort of from one thing to another. Oftentimes for academic positions, we do separate out our academic work history from professional work history. Many academics do have both of these things. It's quite common. But we sort of put those into two different groups. Not something you would necessarily do on a resume. And then we start to move into some of those other categories, such as publications here. So Twyla's had a lot of work published. So you can see that there's a consistency in how it's sort of written out, right? Media coverage, patents, presentations, right? Listing all of this out. Okay. In contrast, we'll just take a look at a resume. Similar, sort of starting with a summary and moving right into skill set, right? Hard and soft skills listed. Professional experience. And then education coming in at the end. Much more targeted. This doesn't mean that this is all the experience that Melissa has had, but it is a relevant experience that would qualify her for this position that she's applying for. Okay, just want to touch on cover letters before I hand it over to Nick. How does this relate? First of all, don't send your resume without a cover letter, okay? Definitely have one, really important. Cover letter should show your interest in the position. It's really this bridge between the position you're applying for and your resume or CV. And what you're doing here is you're just sort of connecting those two things. You want this, I have these qualifications. Let me tell you about that. Okay? What should it include? These are really important things. And I'm actually reviewing positions now. I've reviewed positions for years for different jobs, and I can tell you when people like sort of skip these things in their cover letter, you're just like, why? How did you find out about this opportunity? Do you know where you're applying, right? Make it personalized. You don't want to feel like somebody is sending the same cover letter out to multiple places, right? You want it to seem like, yes, I am interested and focused on the position that I'm applying for. Let them know that. Let them know that you know who you're sending this to. Tell them a little bit about yourself, why you're uniquely qualified. You should be, remember, this is a bridge. We have all this documented experience, and then we have this, what does the company want? So I see you want this, I have this experience, let me tell you a little bit about that experience and why it's special. Give them some details. Give them details outside of just listing things, right? Give a little detail about it. Why would you be an asset? And then make sure at the end of a cover letter, you thank them and you ask for that next step in the process. Let them, please contact me. I look forward to interviewing with you where I can tell you more about this. Okay. With that, let me hand it over to Nick.
Thank you, Christine. Again, my name is Nick Paulus. I, not too long ago, was sitting exactly where you were, well, not too long ago, 27 years ago. I had just got my degree in, a master's degree in graphic design and multimedia publication. And like you, I was looking for a job, tired of being poor, tired of being a student, and I started working on my resume for the first time, a real resume, right? Sending it out to employers. And I had a benefit, something that I was extremely lucky to have. My college, of course, did not do anything to help us prepare to move into the job market. They just gave us a degree and said, good luck. I would have loved having something like this to go to when I was starting my job search. But my wife was in HR at the time. And her job, she worked at the University of Maryland. She was, among her many other duties, she screened all of the applicants for staff that was going to be working at the college. And, she would come home with horror stories about the cover letters with spelling mistakes, or the cover letters applying for the wrong position. Obviously someone who wasn't very careful with how they were approaching their job search. And, she worked with me to develop my resume, which helped a lot. And of course, developing my cover letter. So when I started my search, my job search, the first thing I would give you as far as advice is research the company or institution that you are planning to work for. It will help you develop a cover letter. It'll help you organize your resume. And in some cases, you may decide that you don't want to work for that company. Now, as graduates with master's degree at RIT, when you're in the interview process, that's the time for you to kind of relax. You've got the interview, you have an RIT master's degree. Their job is to convince you to take the job. Yeah, you're going to go over your qualifications, but at that point, they should be trying to convince you to work for them. But how do you get to that point where you've got the resume, or you've got that interview, you're working on your resume? So one of the things I usually start out my lectures or my talks with a joke, but I don't really have time to do that, so I'm going to sprinkle jokes in throughout my lecture here, my talk. Don't judge a book by its cover. That's great for life, it's awesome, we shouldn't do that. It doesn't work for graphic design, and I have a graphic design background. You do judge a book by its cover, I'll tell you, because that's probably what I've designed, or, I'm sorry, visual images count. And it really doesn't count for resumes, because the fact of the matter is, when you're looking for a job, your resume, you'll be judged on it, 100%, and your cover letter. It's that important. Because that's the first opportunity they have to find out who is this person applying for this job. Okay, so my wife stressed a well-written resume will set you apart from most of the people applying for it. And I've always told my students when I give lectures, if you don't know how to write, you're going to end up working for someone who does. And you can start right now by focusing so much time on your resume. It should be written, rewritten, proofed again. Give it to your friends, your family. Find someone with that English degree and let them, honestly, one typo, one misspoken sentence. And I've been on countless committees for hiring people. I will toss a resume in the garbage if I find a typo in the cover letter. because look, there are 75 things I have to look at, different resumes, different cover letters. And if you're not careful enough to create something that doesn't have mistakes when you're trying to find a job, I don't want to hire you. And I tell you, most of the people on committees, they're happy to weed out resumes for that one reason. So get it proved. I can't stress that enough. So if your resume is well written, if it tells, or if your cover letter is well written, and it tells a story about who you are, why you want to work for them, and you can slip in the fact that you've researched the company, I guarantee you they're going to look at your resume with interest. And I've got that from not only my experience on job committees, hiring committees, but my wife as well. She'll tell you immediately, set yourself apart with a cover letter and tell a story. Now I'm going to get to a point with resumes where your resume is going to tell a story too, but that's a little bit further on in the lecture. Okay. Writing 101. Anyone who's taken a writing class, anyone who's done a graphic design project, anyone who's created anything that's going to be looked at by someone else, you have to understand who your audience is, right? I'll take your silence as an agreement. But yes, you have to know who your audience is. And it's important to realize when you're sending a resume out, it very rarely goes to the person who's making the decision right away. It's got to get through HR. And HR, someone's going to be sitting at a desk with a highlighter. They're going to have the job description on one side and your resume on another, and they're going to start highlighting. They're not going to read it word for word, right? Not right away. They're going to make sure that you have checked off the minimal requirements for the job. So, every single resume you send out has to be customized for the job that you're applying for. When I was looking for a job, and just a brief history, when I started working, graphic design had changed. There was no longer 4 people in an office. It was one person doing the job of 4. You know, thank God Bill Gates came along and made graphic design a lot easier than it was when I started my college career. So I never had the opportunity to work with someone else. I always came in as the lead graphic designer who did photography and animation and illustration and page layout. Those used to be separate jobs. But then, you know, you go in, there's no one else there. So no one else was looking at these resumes. They didn't have a graphic design experience. HR, I guarantee you someone in HR wouldn't know what my background is or what is important. They're looking at a list. So write your resume for HR, and if the job announcement says minimum requirements, you have to check those boxes off if you can. Do not lie, because that will come out, but make sure, if you can, put those requirements in your resume. I keep repeating it, but it's true. Tailor it for the job description. Avoid spelling mistakes. I went over that with a cover letter. You'll be surprised how many people have spelling mistakes in their resumes and grammar mistakes. Watch your tenses. There's 2 ways to organize a resume. You take your current job, and that's in the present tense, and everything after that with your experience, you put in the past tense. A graphic designer or someone who does freelance work, it's a little bit difficult to do that. I've been doing freelance work for 20 years. Technically that, until current, right? So that should be the first thing on my resume. But I really want to emphasize my current job. So where do the tenses, how do I work the tenses with that? I decided a long time ago to make everything present tense and just write the resume with action words. I didn't produce or produced, designed, managed. I would just say produce, design, manage these jobs from start to finish or whatever. Action words really help. Avoid first person. Don't say I in the resume. It's a great exercise to force you to write better. You'll have better sentences if you're not using the word I in it. Oh, and just I know this may seem like a simple thing as far as resumes are concerned. Label them correctly. A lot of jobs you're going to be applying online for. There'll be a wizard that's set up where you send your contact information and press this button to upload your resume. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a resume with a job description that is not the job that they're applying for. They'll have the wrong company name. So the file name for your resume, and I probably don't have to say this, but I'm going to anyway because I see it so often. It should have your name in it, the word resume, and the company that you're applying for, right? It's just that simple. Even if you're applying for multiple positions at RIT, have that file management name convention set. When I was applying for jobs, and believe me, I would say this with all certainty, when I started out in my career, I would change jobs every 1.5 to 2 years. As soon as I stopped learning in my current job, I was young enough, I would just move on. Every time I did that, I would use these rules, and I had a 30% callback response for my resumes that I sent out, which is phenomenal. I don't mean to brag, but it was like 30% of the time I would get a call back for an interview. So a well-written resume will just put you on that list, and then you get to sell yourself. And granted, you're getting an RIT degree, that's going to sell you anyway. So believe me, you'll do a great job if you can do this. And I know I'm taking up a lot of time here, but so let's talk about formatting. It has to be a logical structure to your resume. It has to be easy to read. It has to include context. Please don't say that you just worked as an intern at this company and give the dates. Tell what jobs you did. If you can, emphasize that you worked on a special project, because that tells me someone who's reading a job for an intern, they liked his or her work so much they give him a special project to work on. You're telling a story of that job. Not only did I succeed as an intern, I was given additional work to do, a special project. Say who you worked with. I worked with the vice president of whatever on this project, which did this, and quantified by that. Now with graphic design, I'm not going to be able to give hard numbers unless I'm in sales, but if you worked on a project and you are in sales and your sales went up 10%, put those numbers in, right? For a resume, don't include references. One line, references upon request. References take up too much room. Oh, and yeah, one-page resumes, don't worry about that. 2 pages, don't worry about that. My resume is currently 3 pages long. I've never had anyone tell me it's too long, but I'm telling a story in it. And yeah, sometimes I'll reduce the number of jobs, but as someone who came from the federal government, they want to know where you worked. And they want to be able to look at 10 years, 12 years of experience. And sometimes, for me, that would take up a lot of space. And then you start adding things like skills and software. It starts adding up for pages. So just don't worry about keeping it on one page, right? And don't take creativity and say, okay, it would be great if you could be super creative and have, I'm a graphic designer. I would love to have lines going all over the place and fancy backgrounds and stuff. Not for a resume, okay? Keep your creativity to fonts. And by that, I mean one of 4 or 5 fonts. And you've heard of them. We'll go over those in a little bit. And the last bullet there was tell a story, but I kind of went out of sync here. Basic rules. We saw a really nice layout for a resume earlier in this. The bullets lined up, that's the first thing I look at when I look at a resume. if you're not careful enough to make sure that all of your bullets line up, you know, if I see a mistake there, I'm not going to hire you. Because, come on, visually, you have to be able to look at a page and know if it's right. If you don't have a space after a bullet, to me, I'm sorry, but these little tiny things, these details matter in a resume. If your tabs are set to the default of Word of 1/2 inch, I'm sorry, I'm not going to look at it. I know that's weird, but it's one of these things where I'm saying, they don't even know how to change a tab in Word. 1/4 inch. You're trying to maximize your space here. Okay, so fonts. Graphic designer, I love talking about fonts. I've taught classes about fonts. It's awesome. All right? I shouldn't walk away from the mic. I'm so used to doing this. Okay. So I put the fonts here that you should be using, right? Arial. It's a nice sans serif font, and by sans serif I mean it doesn't have the little footies at the bottom of the type. Times New Roman, great. Georgia, you know, keep it to stuff you know. And people will say things, let me dispel some myths for you. People will say that a serifed font like Times Roman is easier to read because the serifs will bring your eye to the next letter. That's a myth. That's not true. Our eyes don't work that way. Our eyes read fonts easily if we're familiar with them. So use the tried and true fonts. Okay? Don't use more than 2. Now, one of the things I love to say, if you can't say it big, say it in red. No more than 2 fonts, okay? That is just getting too busy. This isn't a poster. This is a resume. It's a business document. And the use of your fonts should make sense. Your body type should be 1 font, say Arial. And if you want a display font or something you're going to use for headings, that might be something with a serif to help visually break up that information. My personal favorite for a sans serif is Franklin Gothic. And I changed the font here just so you can kind of see. It's an elegant sans serif font. It's been around for a long time. It's easy to read. And it's an elegant pair with Georgia for a font. They work well together. I would use the Franklin Gothic as body type because it's easy to read when it gets small. So is Arial. So is Helvetica. The government uses Helvetica on government forms for a reason. It's really easy to read when it gets below 6 point. And if you don't think that's true, when you fill out your taxes and you look at the forms, they're in Helvetica. And the fine type is Helvetica because you can read it. Please avoid using Courier. It just looks like a typewriter. It's ugly font. It takes up space. It's a very wide font. It uses up more space on a line than almost any other font. It's terrible. Please don't use it. Comic Sans or anything like it, don't use it. I don't care if you're applying for a job at the Strong Museum of Play. Don't use anything playful like that. And avoid anything that looks like calligraphy. It's hard to read. It may look elegant, but it's just too hard to read because we're not used to reading it. White space is awesome. Okay? White space, simply put, is space on the page that doesn't have anything on it. Your borders count as white space. Give me about 1 inch going all the way around. Give me significant breaks between your paragraphs. White space lets the eye rest between information. A good way to add white space to something that has a long list is to break it up into bullets. These little things will take a type-heavy piece of paper, which no one wants to read, and make it something that the eye won't flinch away from. So I've seen resumes that they like to bold everything, like they're shouting. Use bold as a way to offset things. Italic fonts is another way to highlight things, but use it with discretion. One thing that bothers me, and it bothers, well, I would say a lot of people, is the use of orphans, or you see orphans or hanging phrases. And I even designed this slide to indicate what this is. So at the bottom of the first bullet there, 5, you see the word out on one line. What a waste of space that is for a line, okay? If it won't fit, and that's the only way it's gonna work on your resume, to have a word hanging like that, using up all of that line, rewrite your paragraph. Don't change the margins for that paragraph, because we'll notice, but rewrite it. Because you need that line later on, potentially. Hanging phrases, it might be just 2 or 3 words, or like below it, we have above it. That's also a big waste of time, or space, I should say, right here. Visually, you don't have the luxury of wasting that space on your resume. I mentioned this before, it's a big no-no for me. Make sure all of your bullets have the same spacing throughout your resume. Line them up. If your body type underneath a headline for job experience, and you're describing what you did in a job, is offset by 1/4 of an inch, every single job that you have should line up with that. If you can't do that, it just looks careless, and it will probably get thrown away. Okay, the main sections of a resume, we went over this before. I'm gonna go over it again. Contact information, that is the most important part of your resume besides your job descriptions. We have to be able to contact you. So it should be in a place that's really it's easy to read and find on your resume, which, shocker, is near the top of the first page. I've read stuff where they have the contact information at the end of the resume, at page 2. One, you risk the fact that I'm gonna lose page 2 of your resume, which, if you knew me, is a potential, yeah. Graphic designers aren't well organized as far as paperwork goes. I'll tell you that right now. A lot of us we lose things, sorry. It might be just me, I don't know. Your work experience, obviously, if you're in the visual arts, a portfolio or a link to where we can find your work. Education, that should be prominent too. Look, if you're just starting out, you don't have a lot of work experience, your education should go higher on your resume. It's kind of a hierarchy of information that we're talking about here. So contact information, my first resume was contact information, my education, and then the different internships I had. And my skills came last. I imagine, unless you've changed careers or something like that, your resume might be the same way. Right now, your master's degree is worth about 4 years of working experience. So put that at the top, especially if that's one of the considerations for the job. Must have master's degree. Put that up at the top, right under your name. Awards and certification, special projects. Hey, tell me about yourself if you have space. Do you know more languages? Or what are your interests? I love seeing that. Because when I check you out on social media, which I will, I want to know you have a life. Look, I'm not one of these people that, for me it's perfectly okay if you're at a family picnic and you have a beer in your hand. Don't care. I don't care about that at all. Because I want to know that you have a life outside of work. Because that means you probably won't burn out. Okay, so here's a 2-column resume. A lot of professional resumes are 1 column of type. You might find that a 2-column resume works better for you. I saw in our presentation earlier that we had an example of a 1-column, so I wanted to show you a 2-column and the way it was set up. The use of color is okay, especially if you're going for a creative job. But use it sparingly. Don't go overboard. Okay? But you can see here, all of the bullets line up throughout the whole page. The lines in between my lists are consistent. You'll see, I've seen things where they're not consistent like that, and visually it throws off the whole resume for me. We have interest down here, and yes, this is kind of a creative resume, so they put little infographics down here, which I don't mind seeing. Just means that they spent the time to be a little bit more creative with their resume. It won't work with an engineering resume, probably. But what else do I like about this? They've decided to use brackets, which is nice. Keeps everything, I just think it's kind of an interesting resume. The one thing that this person forgot to do, he's in the creative field. There's no link to his online portfolio, which is a red flag for me. Visually, this resume is great for the position that he's applying for. But without an online resume to check out his work, I'm not going to consider him. So I'm hoping that what I'm saying is kind of, you can kind of interpret it for your own degrees and your own pathways, what you want to work. But I guess one of the things I want to stress here is it doesn't take much for your resume to get thrown out, and it's the little details that will end up doing it. So I mentioned earlier a hierarchy of information. Well, there's a visual hierarchy of text too. So when you look at a page, the upper left-hand corner is the first thing our eyes are going to go to. We read a page here in the West from upper left to the upper right, and then comes down in diagonal and then over here. That's the way we scan a piece of paper, a poster, anything you see in print. It's just the way that our eyes have been trained. So Robert put his name biggest. Easy to find, his contact information is there. It's in the upper left-hand corner, perfect placement. So then as we go over, his contact information is over here, so that's the second thing we're going to look at. And then the hierarchy of information. Work experience, all caps and bold. Great, that's perfect for a headline or display type. And then below it, you have a subhead, which looks like the same size, but it's only an initial cap, which is another great way of offsetting it. And then the body type is smaller. So all of these things, every single heading is the same size, the same style, all caps. The subheads are initial caps, which sets it apart, which is great. Christine, tell me if I'm running over. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up soon. Using color to contrast will make objects stand out. Use it sparingly. Okay, here's a way last thing I want to show you, okay? This is important. If you don't have a lot of work experience, you can design your resume to hide that. We do want to see about a full page. But you can see how this person put all of their work experience here, but they did it in a column that is much smaller than a full page. So if he had done this in a full-page document or full size, he probably would have gone to here. But this way, he only has 2 working experience jobs, right? It looks like more visually. Then he has projects that he's worked on. These are probably school projects. His contact information is well placed. His name is bigger than the other person that we saw because he's using space. He's using white space. This is very easy to read. And then he set off other things here for his skill, his education, and career objective. I'm not a big fan of putting career objectives on a resume. I think it's a waste of space. your cover letter should just say everything that you need to say about career objective. So I don't like putting it on there, but if you need to fill space, go ahead. All right, that's it for right now. I hope you enjoyed this talk. We're here to answer questions, so if you have any, let me know.